So I think what I want to do is try to say something a little differently, and really to reflect additional thoughts I've had about the collective work that we are setting out to do. I also think that part of my contribution to this work is really mobilizing essentially a bully pulpit. It's not the, or even perhaps the biggest one, but it certainly is one, and hopefully one among many, to what has been defined by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences as a crisis in the humanities, with a report issued last year called The Heart of the Matter. I assume some of you, all of you may know of it, some of you may have read it closely, but I think being mindful of what we are all here gathered to focus on and to figure out how to chart a meaningful and constructive path forward, we do have to make the most of the kinds of both evidence in a very general sense and shared communities of allies who are thinking through what does it mean in a nation that, as they define, is not only educating its children poorly, less effectively training its teachers in the humanities, and for them this amounts to a threat to our national security. Now that's sort of government speak. I'm not sure I think we see similar crises. I'm not sure we would couch it in militaristic terms. But to the point of whether or not we can claim a productive citizenry that is inclusive and that has equity built into the framework of our society, I think for me that kind of security really is about cultural security and economic security rather than, say, national security. And I focused on this at a recent talk that I gave at the University of Puerto Rico, really to sort of, no, I'm sorry, at the Ransom Center at the University of Texas. I can't keep up with where I've run my mouth recently. And I guess I just wanted to, for those who haven't read the report, throw out a few things that the report cites. And first, they talk about the declining federal investment has declined by roughly 50% in the humanities. Now, the humanities, by comparison to STEM fields, were always less important to federal funding. But the high water mark was roughly 30% in recent years, has now fallen to 20%, which effectively amounts to a 50% cut in the amount of money the federal government is giving to support general research in the humanities, which is inclusive, I see, of the work that we are engaged in. The other point is that when you compare that to how universities divvy up their allocations for general support of research, the humanities have a much larger slice, which is declining. So universities have essentially carried the weight of the humanities, given that the federal government has never been a major funder of the humanities. But in both cases, the numbers are declining substantially. Why I think this matters is not just that this doesn't necessarily tell us something new, and of course I'm not a big fan of couching, as many of you know, our problems in straight statistical terms. It does give us the kind of talking point that I think we need to be able to say with the imprimatur of the Academy of the Arts and Sciences, we have a problem, and what are we going to do about it? And for them, the issue stretches across the academic communities, but they try to balance a kind of critique of the focus on STEM with a call for action in the humanities. So they don't see this as a zero-sum game, but they do worry aloud in the report about what it means to construct a society that no longer values imagination, that no longer values a kind of appreciation for the soft squishiness that represents the humanities itself. Even the ways in which, as we are all witness to as adults, so much of the soft capital of success, the individual human capital that people bring to their successful careers, generally turns at a certain point in your career on your facility with cultural heritage, with your awareness of, call it world civ, call it American history, however you want to define it. We all know at a certain level that it's those kinds of skills and fluency that really do shape the professional trajectories of people beyond a certain level. So one could argue that maybe STEM becomes a kind of Trojan horse for a new vocational class of employees who will not have that cultural capital if they don't have the arts. And that for the elite, for the privileged, the arts remain core and central to how they educate their own children outside of our public education systems. I think we have to be willing to at least offer research projects that give meat to these such claims. So here I am essentially offering hypotheses that I think people around this table can explore in their own various ways. But I think that STEM has essentially become one angle on a kind of new vocational army. Now it looks better than the vocational army of the past, but Ainsley, for example, Erickson from Teachers College participated in a conversation at the Schomburg a couple of weeks ago as part of our conversation series, and I can't remember if it was Ainsley. I think it was Ainsley's work in Nashville, Tennessee, where even in the 1970s, I believe is the period she was covering, there were gradations of vocational work. And so the black students were stuck in woodshop and basic mechanics, and the white students in Nashville were learning aeronautical engineering. They were working literally on airplanes. And so I think the bar has risen for what counts as technical knowledge and training today, whether it's coding or building microchips. But at a certain level, there remains still a glass ceiling beyond what it means to have even those basic skills. So I think part of the ruse in the STEM area is that we imagine all of these kids running to Microsoft for high-tech jobs, which are really now the new woodshop mechanical jobs. And that the layer that moves them from those positions of leadership as we imagine them today to the top remain in this soft humanistic space where people know how to talk, walk the walk, and really move and be engaged in large worldly matters. There is, and this is this great point that I had to land on, and I've been holding it right there. It's been right there for like 250 words, and now it's gone. It has to do with the morning. Good thing I'm not in front of a lot of people right now. So, oh, yes, here it is. So one of the things, and this is really a call to sort of think through these things. So we know there is an Asian American achievement gap, or I should say a white achievement gap by comparison to Asian American counterparts. We also know that Asian American and Asian immigrants are held as exemplars of a kind of commitment to STEM fields. We know that, sort of in the rhetoric of national security, it is BRIC nations, and particularly India, that is leading the way in producing the world's engineers, and they're continuing to come, and Americans are crying foul because they think to themselves, we must, educate our own to do this work. Yet, all the evidence of leadership in our country suggests that for all of that technical know-how that our South Asian engineers bring to the table, they're not running our companies. They're not sitting on the boards of directors across America. They are not the leadership class. So I want to put that in conversation with the work around historical literacy, because I think that's something new to my thinking about this, in the ways in which it calls us to be more critical of exactly what STEM means to the children I think that we are particularly concerned about, particularly poor children, particularly children of African heritage or Latino heritage in this country who remain in our public school systems, the ones who are building on intergenerational disadvantage and continue to be fodder for political debates about what they should be doing. So when someone like Newt Gingrich says as a presidential candidate in 2012 that black children in Harlem don't see examples of people working hard, not only does this defy the actual reality of working people and how much harder they actually work to make ends meet, but that they should be janitors in their own schools as a means of learning a kind of commitment to a work ethic That is sort of the raw political discourse of the far right, but somehow I think it squares a lot more neatly than we'd like to imagine with the kind of commitment to STEM. So when someone like Mitch Daniels is becoming a booster for STEM, we should have concern. We should caution, because again, I think the intellectual elite and the political elite of our society fully recognize that privilege and wealth are articulated and expressed in this country through the humanities. I mean, if I go to another cocktail party or gala or benefit and somebody asks me something about some obscure artist that I've never heard of, I'm going to vomit. But that's precisely the world in which people are not engaged. And precisely coming back to the crisis of historical literacy, coming back to the crisis that the Heart of the Matter identifies, I think, puts the humanities really at the forefront of a larger battle over inequality in our country. So again, I am really talking through these things because I didn't want to give you something that is more polished for me, because these are new thoughts to me. There are other examples here in this address that I gave at the Ransom Center, mostly drawing from things that are extant in the media, talking about Stanford's imbalance between the number of faculty in humanities versus the number of majors. Harvard's experienced 20% declines. So we also have a consumer demand problem. And the consumer demand problem to me also is about the K through 12 pipeline. So if the teachers aren't prepared to defend the right to teach humanities, if they are not willing to fight for arts education and robust historical literacy and cultural literacy in the classroom, then you're also looking at students who are coming out of our public schools in particular, who are only imagining success as defined by engineering degrees, business degrees, professional degrees. And that consumer side of it then reinforces the policy setting agendas of state legislatures and presidents of universities that say the students don't want to take these classes. They can see that there are no jobs in these areas. So, 20 years ago when I was a student, places like Goldman Sachs was deliberately recruiting people with English majors and history majors because they knew, one, that those kids were smart, and smart people can learn anything, and two, that they would have the ability to think about what they were doing in a bigger context, which ultimately would redound to the benefit of the company, rather than everyone being an automaton with a very narrow, specialized focus on, intuiting financial derivatives. So something shifted, and I'm not sure the Goldman Sachs shifted in its ability to recruit, but I wouldn't be surprised if even there's been an erosion of an appreciation at the hiring level of what it actually takes to produce people who think deeply and critically about the world.